Of course, here's a compelling introduction for your YouTube video story. I never thought renting a small apartment would lead me into something so unsettling. At first, everything seemed normal, just a quiet place in a decent neighborhood. The landlord, Mr. Thompson, was a strict but fair man, and his son, Jake, was, well, just there. He was about my age, in his early 20s, but we never really talked much. He mostly kept to himself, always looking down when he passed by, like he was avoiding eye contact on purpose. But I figured he was just shy, or maybe awkward. Then little things started to stand out. I'd see him outside my door at odd hours, just standing there, almost like he was about to knock but changed his mind. Sometimes I'd hear strange noises coming from his side of the house, whispers, tapping sounds, furniture moving late at night. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. But then something happened that I couldn't ignore. One evening, I came home late from work. The hallway light was flickering, making everything look eerier than usual. As I reached my door, I felt a presence, someone watching me. My stomach tightened as I turned my head slightly and saw him, Jake, standing at the top of the stairs, staring right at me. His expression was blank, almost like he wasn't really there, but his eyes, something was off about his eyes. I tried to shake it off, offering a polite nod before unlocking my door, but he didn't move, just kept staring. It was the first time I genuinely felt uncomfortable around him. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the apartment sent my heart racing. Was it just an overactive imagination? Or was something really wrong? The next morning, I found something outside my door, a small piece of folded paper. No name, no explanation. Just a single sentence written in shaky handwriting. Please don't tell my dad. That's when I knew this wasn't just weird behavior. Jake was hiding something, and whatever it was big enough to make him afraid. At that moment, I had two choices: ignore it and pretend nothing was happening, or start digging for the truth. And I chose the second one. What I found, I never could have expected. I stared at the note in my hands, my fingers tightening around the thin paper. My mind raced with questions. Don't tell his dad what? What could Jake possibly be hiding that would make him reach out like this, so desperate, so afraid? I glanced toward his door, half expecting it to creak open, but everything remained still. The hallway was empty, silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I could have just ignored it, pretended I never saw the note, but something about it didn't let me walk away. That night, I paid closer attention. I turned off my lights earlier than usual, hoping to give the impression that I had gone to bed, but I stayed awake, listening. And sure enough, just past midnight, I heard it again. The whispers, the shuffling, the same eerie sounds coming from Jake's side of the house. Only this time, they were followed by something else, a soft, muffled thud, like something heavy dropping to the floor. I crept closer to the wall that separated our apartments, pressing my ear against the cold surface. My pulse pounded in my ears. Then, a sound that sent chills down my spine. A quiet sob. I pulled back, my breath unsteady. Was Jake hurt? Or was something happening in there that he didn't want anyone to know about? My gut told me to knock on his door, ask if he was okay. But a stronger voice inside warned me to stay out of it. Whatever this was, it wasn't normal. The next morning, I decided to keep an eye on him. I sat by my window with a cup of coffee, pretending to scroll through my phone, waiting to see if he left the house. Hours passed, and nothing. He never stepped outside, never even opened his curtains. But then something caught my eye. Mr. Thompson, his father. He was standing by Jake's door, his posture stiff, his hand gripping the doorknob. He hesitated for a moment before finally pushing it open. The door creaked as he stepped inside, and just as it shut behind him, I heard it again. That same soft thud. Only this time, it wasn't followed by sobbing. It was completely silent. I held my breath, waiting for some kind of noise from Jake's room. A voice, movement, anything. But the silence stretched on, heavy and unnatural. I didn't know how long Mr. Thompson stayed in there, but when the door finally opened, he stepped out with the same stiff posture, his expression unreadable. He locked the door behind him, not just closed it, locked it. Then, without a glance in my direction, he walked away. I knew then that something was very, very wrong. For the next few days, I didn't see Jake at all. No footsteps in the hallway, no strange noises at night. It was as if he had completely disappeared, and his door? It stayed locked. The landlord carried on as if nothing had changed, going about his usual routine. But I could feel it, an uneasiness in the air, like a secret pressing against the walls, waiting to be discovered. Then, one evening, I heard a sound that made my stomach drop, a knock, but not at my door. It was coming from inside Jake's room. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I stood frozen in my kitchen, my heart hammering. How was that possible? If Jake was in there, why hadn't he come out for days? And if he wasn't, then who or what was knocking? I knew I had 2 choices: ignore it and pretend nothing was happening, or finally get some answers. I took a step toward his door, then another, and just as I reached for the handle, a voice, barely above a whisper, came from the other side. "Help me." My breath hitched. The voice was barely audible, but I knew it was Jake. He was in there, alive, and he was asking for help. I pressed my hand against the door, my mind racing. "Jake?" I whispered, my voice shaky. No response, just silence. Then another knock, so soft it was almost hesitant. I reached for the doorknob, but it didn't budge. Locked. I swallowed hard, glancing down the hallway to make sure Mr. Thompson wasn't around. My heart pounded in my chest as I crouched down, pressing my ear to the door. "Are you hurt?" I whispered. A pause, then just one word. "Yes." Panic tightened in my chest. This wasn't just strange behavior anymore. This was serious. I couldn't just walk away, not after hearing that. I tried to stay calm, thinking fast. The landlord had locked the door, which meant he had the key. But why? Why would a father lock his own son in a room and act like nothing was wrong? I stepped back, my hands clammy. I needed to find a way inside. But before I could move, I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps coming down the hall. "Mr. Thompson." I darted back into my apartment, closing the door as quietly as possible. My pulse pounded as I listened. The footsteps stopped in front of Jake's door. Then, the sound of keys jingling. The lock clicked and the door creaked open. I could hear hushed voices, Mr. Thompson speaking in a low, firm tone. Then something else, a muffled struggle, a gasp, a scraping sound, like someone being dragged. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making a noise. My body was frozen, my mind screaming at me to do something. But what? I had no idea what was happening in that room. All I knew was that Jake had asked for help, and now I wasn't sure if I'd get the chance to give it. I stayed frozen by my door, heart pounding, straining to hear what was happening. The muffled noises from Jake's room stopped. Then, nothing. Just silence. A thick, eerie silence that made my skin crawl. I needed to see what was going on. I took a deep breath and inched toward my peephole, my hands slick with sweat. Mr. Thompson's door was still slightly open. I could barely make out his shadow moving inside, but I couldn't hear Jake anymore. My stomach twisted. Then, just as I was about to step back, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A second shadow. Someone else was in there. It wasn't Jake. The shape was too tall, too broad, and it was moving slowly, deliberately, toward Mr. Thompson. My breath hitched as I realized the landlord didn't seem to notice. He was too focused on whatever he was doing. But then, all at once, his posture stiffened, like he finally sensed it. He turned sharply, and the light in his room flickered. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of something in the dim light. A figure, standing unnaturally still, just behind him. Then, the bulb went out. I jerked back from the peephole, my pulse hammering. The hallway was dead silent again. I had no idea what I had just seen, but every instinct in my body screamed at me to get out. I grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking as I debated calling the police. But before I could even unlock the screen, a noise stopped me cold. A slow, deliberate knock, not from Jake's door, not from Mr. Thompson's, from mine. My breath caught. I took a step back, staring at the wood as another knock followed. Then a voice, low, not Jake's, not Mr. Thompson's. "I know you saw." I couldn't move, my entire body locked up as the words sank in. "I know you saw." The voice was low, almost amused. But there was something else beneath it. Something cold. I forced myself to swallow, my throat dry. My shaking hand hovered over the doorknob, but I didn't dare open it. Instead, I stepped back, heart hammering. Who was out there? Another knock. Harder this time. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but just as I pressed call, my lights flickered. A loud bang came from the hallway, like something heavy had slammed against the wall. I held my breath, gripping the phone like a lifeline. Then, footsteps. Fast, retreating footsteps. I inched toward the peephole, pulse racing. The hallway was empty. Whoever had been there was gone. A rustling sound caught my attention. My stomach dropped as I noticed something on the floor. A key. Jake's key. Without thinking, I grabbed it and rushed to his door, fumbling with the lock. The moment it clicked open, I pushed inside and froze. The room was dark, the air thick with something stale. And in the corner, barely visible in the dim light, Jake was curled up on the floor, trembling. His eyes darted to mine, filled with something I couldn't quite place. Fear? Relief? Before I could speak, a whisper brushed against my ear, though no one else was in the room. "You shouldn't have come." The door behind me slammed shut. My breath caught as the door slammed behind me. My hands fumbled for the light switch, and when the dim glow finally filled the room, I could see Jake more clearly. He was pale, his clothes rumpled, his body curled up like he had been trapped here for days. I rushed toward him. "Jake, what's going on? Who was that?" His hands gripped my wrist with surprising strength. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "He doesn't like it when people interfere." A chill ran down my spine. "Who?" Before he could answer, the room suddenly felt heavier, like the air itself was pressing down on us. The lights flickered again, casting strange shadows across the walls. Then, the door unlocked by itself. Jake yanked me toward it. "We have to go, now." I didn't hesitate. We bolted out of the room, down the hallway, and straight outside. The night air was cold against my skin, but I didn't stop running until we were halfway down the street. Only then did I dare to look back. Mr. Thompson's house stood eerily quiet, its windows dark. No sign of movement, no sign of him. Jake exhaled shakily. "He's gone?" I turned to him, still breathless. "Your dad?" Jake shook his head slowly. "Number whatever was in that house." I wanted to press for answers, but something about the way he looked at me, the sheer exhaustion, the relief, told me that some things were better left unknown. The next day, the house was empty. Mr. Thompson was never seen again. And Jake? He disappeared too. I moved out soon after, but even now, some nights, I still hear it, a knock at my door.